The acceleration of already high food, fertilizer and fuel prices has triggered a global crisis that could drive millions more into extreme poverty, magnifying hunger and malnutrition, while threatening to raise the global humanitarian caseload to new highs and erase hard-won development gains.
Food pricing is our #1 problem right now as a result of all this perfect storm for 2022. But 2023, it very well will be a food availability problem.
What's the one thing that we all have in common? It's food. We need it, we enjoy it, and it brings us together. But right now, accessing affordable and nutritious food is becoming more and more difficult around the world. We've found ourselves living in a global food crisis.
Millions upon millions of people, in fact, 345 million people today are suffering from hunger at a crisis level.
Since early 2022, we at WFP already warned that this would be a year of unprecedented hunger. The pandemic's economic consequences play a huge part in hunger rising to unprecedented levels. At the same time, climate shocks continue to destroy lives, crops, and livelihoods, and undermine people's ability to feed themselves. Meanwhile, conflict keeps waging war on everyday life. As the biggest driver of hunger, currently 60% of the world's hungry live in areas afflicted by violence. In Ukraine, the war has transformed what was the breadbasket of the world into a major humanitarian aid recipient. Before the war began, Ukraine produced enough food to feed 400 million people per year. But when the war started, Ukraine's food exports all but stopped, trapping corn and wheat inside the country.
You know what is really interesting is that our markets for exporting food are highly concentrated. What that means is that less than 10 countries export 80-90% of total exports of crops like wheat, corn, rice, soybean. So when any shock happens to one of these 10 countries or less, we see a disproportionate effect around the world.
It's likely you're already feeling the impact of the crisis, whether that's seeing higher food prices during your weekly shop or finding limited supplies in the supermarket.
Before the war in Ukraine started, prices of food commodities were already at a 10-year high. Prices of fuel commodities were already at a 7-year high. And now on top of that, because of the war, things were not moving as they were supposed to out of the Black Sea. And this is troublesome, not only for the poor countries, but also for rich countries. Look at the United States, 8.5% inflation, hasn't happened in decades. Look at UK, 10.1%. So if our advanced economies are suffering as they are, what to talk of poor net food and fuel importing countries?
When it comes to the world's most vulnerable, the cost of the global food crisis will be counted in lives lost.
Almost every country in the Middle East and North Africa region have been hard hit by the war in Ukraine. This is a region that's highly dependent on food imports, and especially on the imports of grain from Ukraine and from Russia. 30% and more of the grain that comes to this region comes from Ukraine and Russia because of the geographical proximity. There are many countries in the region who have had a big burden in terms of food prices because of the conflict in Ukraine. To give you an example, a country like Syria, food prices have increased by 37% from February till April, and that's since the onset of the conflict.
Even before the global food crisis, some families were already living on the edge.
ما كانت ظروفنا هيك أبداً. كنت أعمل مكبوس، كنت أعمل زيتون، كانت الأسعار معقولة يعني. الوضع أسوأ لأنه الأسعار كل ما عم ترتفع. يعني ربطة الخبز اللي هي ربطة خبز الشيء الأساسي بالبيت سعرها تغير. هلا كتير شغلات نحن حارمين حالنا منها، مثلا الفواكه ممنوعة تفتحي برادي فاضي مصفر. هلا غليجة صغير من المدرسة نتغدى وراحت للمساء ليجي بيو من الشغل لحتى نتعشى، وجبتين بنها.
The global food crisis we're facing is being worsened by the energy crisis and the fertilizer crisis that are also occurring, leaving millions of people at risk of hunger and unable to afford a basic meal.
What we don't want for sure is that today's affordability crisis turns into or becomes tomorrow's availability crisis. What I mean by that is that today, if you have money, you can buy food. But if you don't sort out a few things right now, tomorrow, even if you have money, it won't be enough to buy food. What are those things to sort out? We need to make sure that the next agricultural season is a good one. That requires agricultural inputs, especially fertilizer. And if that doesn't happen, our affordability crisis, which is bad enough as we can see around the world, turns into an availability crisis, meaning that food will be even less affordable for millions upon millions of people around the world. I like to say that when WFP is setting records, that doesn't sound great for the world. In 2020, we assisted about 116 million people. In 2021, we assisted about 128 million people. That's the highest in our 60-year history. And guess what? This year, we're planning to assist between 140 to 150 million people. But in order for that to happen, WFP needs funding because we are voluntarily funded. And two, we always need access. And when we have both of them, we can do the job.
Right now, WFP's response focuses on three key things: providing emergency food and cash assistance and nutrition support to prevent millions from dying of hunger, supporting national social protection systems, and strengthening food systems. It's clear we all need to work together and fast in the face of today's global food crisis.